Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Recruiters with No Limits, always live and never scripted. I'm here with my sidekick and co-host, John Ruffini. What's up, Johnny?
Miss you, Richard.
Dude, I miss you too, brother. 2 weeks. I just got to tell you. And I got to get a couple shout outs real quick.
You know, I was wondering, I lost my best friend.
Dude, it was, you know what? We love our podcasting, but I just got to give a shout out to the Ohio Staffing Association, John. If you've seen the pictures, man, Lake Erie was like Key West. I mean, what a conference.
Looks like it was a great conference.
Oh, incredible. And then last week, Aviante Connect, another great conference. All I can say is mobile is all the way this year.
Oh, yeah.
But now we're back.
No doubt.
Now we're back to the studio and recruiting, what we do best, right, John?
That's right. Telling it like it is.
That's it. So look at our guests we have today. I mean, we have an exciting show. Lindsay from Windridge Consulting. What's up, Lindsay?
Hey, like I said, we're having a huge thunderstorm right now, so that's what's happening.
On the West Coast.
Yep, West Coast, Seattle.
You got it. So, hey, Lindsay, let's just deep dive in real quick about yourself. Give us a little bit of history of how'd you get into the business and all that good stuff, and then we'll deep dive in.
Okay, great. I started Windridge Consulting in 2001, and I wanted to become a coach. That was my main goal in it, was to do coaching. So I took did some coaching with Franklin Covey organization, and part of their program is they offer the Winslow assessment. And the coaching was okay, but the Winslow assessment was spot on. And I was starting my business. I knew there were some areas I needed to be working on. My leadership was not the best, and I knew I needed to ramp it up. And the Winslow just nailed me. Richard, I think you talked about that when you took it. It was like, oh my gosh, yeah. I know my strengths. But to see areas that were just kind of undermining what I was trying to do. And so it was so impactful on me that what I did, was then I called Winslow Research directly and just said, hey, I want to be licensed in this. I want to use this when I come in and start my business. And primarily at that point, I was thinking coaching. And that was the beginning of it. And then it morphed into that I do a lot of hiring work. Actually, the bulk of my business is in hiring, is in helping people make hiring decisions using behavioral assessments, getting a glimpse of a person before they bring them into the company so they know the potential, and they also know potential assets and potential concern areas. And then they can decide how they want to deal with those and how they want to work with those moving forward. So, yeah, but it was so impactful to me. And so that's why I got specifically involved with Winslow. I've taken lots of assessments, and I do like assessments, but this one was just, it moved the dial for me. So,
wow.
What do you think it is about the Winslow assessment that was different from other assessments that you've seen or taken?
Well, for one thing, a lot of assessments are styles type assessments. So they group you into, or what I kind of consider label you, they group you into a category. And I've even heard clients complain that when they're using styles assessments, people tend to use them as an excuse. I'm just this is the way I am. And what I liked about the Winslow was it is a performance-based behavioral assessment, measuring where you are right now. So you could have been great 5-10 years ago. Life happens in the interim, and now you're struggling. And especially when you're being hired, you're not going to get the same performance out of this person now, after all life happened, as you would have 5 years ago when they were like in their really sweet spot. And so that is what I like about the Winslow, as far as really, really dialing it down to behaviors. I also like the fact that behaviors can be changed. They can. I've done it myself. That you can look at this information, you can get some coaching, some training, you can work with yourself, and you can make those changes without just being stuck. And I always tell people when they're using them, I said that this is a starting point. This is a starting point where you are right now. For whatever reason, let's think about some small steps and get you moving forward. In the hiring process, when I'm talking with people, I say, well, this is where this person is right now. Do you want to take the risk of bringing this into the company? So two different sides to it. When I'm working with internal people, coaching, employee development, I'm a champion. Myself and the Winslow, we're championing for these people. We want to see them succeed. When I'm working with hiring managers and in the hiring realm, then myself and the Winslow are gatekeepers. And we want to make sure that they're getting the best candidate they can. And even when they have to hire, because this happens all the time, you have to hire because you need a position filled. And the person may not assess all that well, but you are able to go into it knowing where the concerns are and having a plan to move forward with that new hire. So, yeah. So, gatekeeper champion, that's kind of my two sides.
So I'm a big fan of the assessments. We use them here as part of the process. It's never the only part, of course. Do you ever get a situation where, because what I like about what you just said was, assessments can help you interview someone because you can probe for areas that might be of concern. And then once the person's on board, you can also develop a development plan for them based on where they might be weaknesses. That latter part is sometimes where I think companies fall short because they don't take the time to do that. How often do you see that versus those that actually use it for that purpose?
Well, with my clients, I really push on that. And I will ask them, when I do follow up with them, I always ask them, and you got him his participants report. You've got him started. You've had the one-on-one with him going over his action plan. I mean, I really do communicate with my clients as much or as little as they want or need me. Some clients, they're fairly independent and they just want to do it themselves. But that's part of my job, is to make sure that they're using the assessment and getting all the uses out of it. The other really nice thing, and I'm sure other assessments have this too, but Winslow's is pretty sweet, is group profiles, where when I'm looking at a group of candidates, maybe for a management position, we can put them all side by side. I can get on the phone with hiring managers, owners, whoever needs to be in on the conversation. And we can go and look at, 5, 6 candidates side by side, talk about strengths and weaknesses, talk about assets they're bringing. A lot of times what that does is it's almost like a sounding board for the company. They can kind of talk out what they've seen in the interview. And I will say, a lot of times it's not the strongest and the best scoring that is going to get the position, because when you talk about it and you start seeing the pros and cons and how this will fit into the culture, etc., it may be your second or third as far as scoring, assessment scoring goes. It might not be your top scorer. I've seen that happen with small companies where you've got a guy who's just like superstar. He's all 10s. I mean, the guy's just a powerhouse. And I always have that conversation. Okay, are you ready for this? Because this guy at the top is going to come in and he is going to run with it, and you just better get out of the way. Yeah, over there, Richard. And for some small companies, that's not a good fit. They need somebody who's a little more pulled back. And so, while I think assessment scores are important to look at, I also think that we're dealing with real people. And your company is unique to you. And so that's how I try to fit into that and help balance people. And so actually my consulting, I do a lot of hiring consulting, which kind of turned into my coaching gig, just with the hiring managers, owners, HR people, just to make sure that they are thinking. It's all about thinking, and it's all about common sense. And
it's
really
also...
and respect.
To your point, it's also about culture too, because to your point, you could have someone that scored really, really well on the assessment, but then you meet them in the interview and you're like, oh, this person's not good for our company. So skill-wise, they might be, but you're not going to get the intangibles evaluated unless you actually interview that person. Would you agree?
Oh, well, yeah, I would agree. And you bring up a really good point. Assessments are part of the process. They're not the whole process. There are cases where the assessment may show something up that says, this is really not going to be, this is a train wreck. But, the majority of times that's not the case. And so, just being able to pull back and, I just lost my train of thought.
Well, I got to tell you right now, Lindsay, this assessment, I'm going to tell anybody out there, I question. I was like, no way. And when I took the Winslow, I tell you what, it was 99.9% me down to a T. I got scared. I was like, holy cow. So any doubters out there?
That's not the verbiage you used when we were off the air, Richard.
Go ahead, say it.
No, that's all right.
And I always tell people with that, that because when I'm coaching somebody and they go, well, I don't think I'm a 2 in responsibility and yada, and they get really defensive, I always, I'm not going to argue with them. I always just say, hey, look, just sit with it. You sit with this for a couple weeks, a month, then let's have a conversation, because I bet you now that you're aware of it, you will see it show up. And 9 times out of 10, they come back and go, oh gosh, I wasn't even aware I was doing that. And that's the whole point in the development piece of it, is to help people become aware.
Yeah, because nobody wants to see that they scored low in any category.
No, I know, and I hear it all the time. But you know what? And the other thing is, we all have areas that we're working on. Everybody does. And sometimes those high scores, people can think they're an asset, but there's a shadow side to high scores. There's a downside to somebody who's a 10 in assertiveness. Mm-hmm. I mean, they can just be overpowered. They can speak without thinking. And if they're a 10 in assertiveness and a 1 in control, which is an impulsive piece, I mean, you can imagine they're just going to blow people out of the water, and probably say that, if they're managing people, they're probably going to be just tough, and it's not going to be a good fit. So, those are areas. So high scores, yes, high scores are good, but not always.
Right. I think it's interesting that, and I think you mentioned this earlier, how it evaluates the person where they are today, because I know that it's funny, in the role I'm in now, it's different from the role I was in 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. So the way I think and what's important to me and my priorities and what I'm focused on, totally different. So me taking the assessment 15 years ago, I'm scoring one way, but when I take it now, I look at the traits and the scores that come back, and it makes sense for where I am now. Cool. But when I look at who I used to be and actively selling and running a desk, it was totally opposite. But that's because people transition into different roles, so your mind is different and you're focused on things. So I like that you say it's about where you are now. It's not necessarily, hey, this is you forever.
Yeah, no, not at all. When I first took it, I was really bitter. I was really burned out from the leadership position I'd been in. And hey, I'm a good person. So, it was when but I was so tired, and I was just stressed. And I worked on it for about 3 years, retook the Winslow, and yes, the scores I had wanted to bring up, they did come up. I worked really hard on it. And, they didn't fly from a 1 to a 10. But they came up into that comfortable range, and I think that's the thing that's important to remember. And I can guarantee you, if you would have hired me back in that first assessment day, you would have got somebody that I could interview well. I'm a nice person, I'm smart, all that kind of stuff. But I would have come in and I would have had sort of a chip on my shoulder, and I can guarantee you, I would have been the kind of person that once. And I hate the word triggered, but once something happened within this new organization that would have pushed that button, then I would have fallen back into those same old patterns because I hadn't had enough time to break those patterns. And that's the key point. Yeah, that's the key point. And remember, so when we're looking at candidates and you see maybe low trust, you see, really high autonomy, low responsibility, low coachability, and respect for management, and you're thinking, wow, something happened here. So this person's kind of been burned, and then maybe even low confidence, composure, and tough-mindedness. Then you start thinking, okay, they might have all the skills, but right now they're at the end of their rope. And if you bring them in, that's what you're going to be dealing with for a little while. Now, that's not to say that in 2 years or when they realize this and work this through and have a little space and distance from maybe their last job, which was horrific, that they're not going to be a really good fit. But right now, this is where they're at. And so be ready for it if you need to hire this person or want to hire this person. And I deal with a lot of companies who they need to get bodies in the position. I mean, it's just the way life goes. And so I do a lot of reviews on that and just talking about those pros and cons and really trying to help them weigh out how much they're willing to train and how much energy they're willing to put into a person if they have low scores or scores that need to be adjusted.
In your opinion, at what stage of the hiring process should an assessment be given to a candidate?
For money saving purposes, I always encourage people to do as much pre-screening as you can before you bring the Winslow in. The Winslow is a pretty hard-hitting assessment. So I always say get down to your final, 2 to 5 candidates. You can pre-screen a lot, do your due diligence on that end before you put the money into the assessment, and then go ahead. And I'm talking upper level candidates here. So if you were doing entry level hourly workers, you could probably use. We have a 11 trait profile that's just basically, are they going to show up for work? And yeah, you can use that, and you can use that kind of across the board. But for your upper level people, do as much as you can have probably a pre-interview, then do the assessment so that you can get information to come back in. Because when you come back in, you're going to know exactly where you want to target your questions. If it's around structure, if it's around mental structure, maybe this person is a 2 or a 3 in mental structure. They're real comfortable with ambiguity, but when you need all the I's dotted and T's crossed, this is not that important to them. Their mind doesn't work that way. And so, those are things that you want to be thinking about.
Gotcha. So Lindsay, I got to ask you, so the pre-employment assessment's great, but what after 6 months? Is there any more assessments throughout the whole process? Maybe 6 months or a year later? Does anybody ask for that?
Well, I do a lot of my clients come in and maybe not a year later, but typically about 2 years later, and we'll reassess. Yeah, I have quite a few clients that do that, but they're upper level people because people change and life happens, and it gives them that next stepping stone for development. So yeah, that does happen occasionally. The biggest thing is you don't want to do. I've had people who they don't like their assessment results, or maybe this is their friend who's applying for the job and they don't like what they see in the results, and they're like, oh, well, can they retake it? They just were in not a good mood that day. And it's like, no, you know what? This is what they did. Let's have some accountability.
Who they are.
Exactly. You know what would be cool is, could you imagine having an assessment every year, like 20, 30, 40, 50, every 10 years to see how you develop? See if you go up or down.
It would be interesting to see the highs and the lows.
Right.
Boy. I don't even know about my 20s, Joan. I'm not even going to talk about that.
That's interesting. Going back to what you were just talking about, though, Lindsay. Does it impact a person's results if they're not in the right frame of mind, if they're not thinking clearly, if they've had a bad day, or are they going to pretty much score the way they're going to score regardless of those outside circumstances?
If they've had a bad day, obviously we always encourage you take the assessment when you're rested, and able to concentrate. So I don't think just having a bad day would particularly influence the scores. There's enough balance and weights and balances in the assessment. If they're going through something in their personal life, though, yeah, because these are behaviors, and it will be reflected. But you know what? And here's the deal: is you bring yourself into your work. So, and I'm going to be coaching somebody right now who's going through a difficult personal time. She's a great employee, but she's really going through a difficult time, and so, her personal life does affect her work performance via distractions and things like that. So,
and to your point,
it wouldn't just change because, I'm having a bad day.
But to your point, so there's that instance where it's evaluating you or assessing you how you are right now. So if you're going through an emotional turmoil, that's where you are right now. And yeah, you're going to bring that into the office
You do.
because that's where you are right now.
You do. I have a client that's a hospital on the East Coast, and they were assessing CNA candidates. And it was an interesting thing. They found out that the most successful, the ones who got hired and were successful and fit into the position the best, they scored high in contentment. This kind of optimism or positive, I found that fascinating. I had never really heard that, but they did a lot of assessing. So they had sort of the statistical numbers to look at. And that was what they found, was that contentment score was really important. And if you think about it, just like I was talking, if you bring somebody in who's low in contentment, maybe they're bitter, maybe they had a bad experience at their last job under a difficult manager, and they're just angst, everything is just undermining them, they are not going to focus and perform as well.
And that's interesting.
If people don't have, it sounds kind of corny a little bit, but if people don't have a positive attitude, it really brings down the workplace. And
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, and depending on the size of the company, in a large company, they can absorb a lot of that. In a smaller company, it's huge. It'll just,
Yeah, it's interesting. In a larger company, it can bring down a team or a department. But in a small company, it could bring down the whole ship.
It does bring down the whole ship. Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really difficult. So that's one score that I have learned to pay attention to with people and find out what's going on. Sometimes you'll find out, I know I've had candidates in the past, maybe they've lost a child, or some kind of personal trauma has happened. And then you can understand some of their low scores. You can give them grace on some of this stuff. That's why I don't like going strictly by the numbers, because a lot of times there are reasons. I had a hiring manager for a large company, HR manager, we assessed, and this gal was just like you say, 9s, 10s across the board, just incredible. And then she was a 1 in ambition, like no career drive, no nothing. And I got on the phone with her after they assessed her and everything, and I said, it's so strange, you're such a perfect fit for this position, but that 1 in ambition, this is going to take a lot of drive. You got to push out. And she told me that her son and her husband had been killed a year before.
Oh, holy cow.
Man.
And she said, I just reprioritized my whole life. And at that point I went, okay, well, we're not even going to pay attention to that 1 in ambition because, you have a very valid reason to have that score. That's why it's important, if you're using an assessment, to have somebody who will back you up and help you understand what the scores are and how to find out where they come from.
Yeah, how to have that dialogue with the candidate to probe into those low scores and not just take them for face value. Very important.
Oh yeah, you would have just said, "Oh, she doesn't have, she's not even interested anymore. She's old. She's a little bit older. She's older. She doesn't, she's just not into having a career. Are we really going to get the work out of her that we need to get?" And yet, when you found out what the reason was, it made total sense.
Have you ever had a candidate just flat out refuse to take an assessment?
Yeah.
What
do you think? 2012.
What do you think that says about the person? Like, what does it say about someone that they don't want to take an assessment? And maybe they're saying, "Oh, I don't have time to take it," or this, that, and the other. But what do you think that? Is there anything to read into that if someone doesn't want to take an assessment?
Well, yeah. Sure there is, for sure. They're getting hired for a job. What happens when they're on the job and they don't want to do what you just asked them to do? That's something to pay attention to. Winslow has 2 sets of control features. They have an accuracy control feature, which is 10 really dumb questions scattered throughout the assessment. The youngest manager I know is 85 years old, duh. And then they have objectivity questions, which are superhuman things we all like to say we do, but we don't, or negative things that we've all done but don't necessarily like to admit. And an example of that would be, I have successfully completed every project I ever started. And no one has successfully completed every project they ever started.
Ooh.
Right.
Think about it. Successful is kind of the key word, and every, you just, no, that hasn't happened. So one day I had two candidates, different parts of the countries. First candidate called me first thing in the morning. He had gotten the bias. And when you get the bias, it gives you directions and you're just asked to retake the assessment. Kind of like being asked to redo a task when maybe you don't do it well enough on the job. We all have to redo things. So let's have a good attitude about this. Well, this guy called up and he did not want to retake the assessment. And I told him, well, I gave him the example of the successfully completed every project he ever started. He said, well, I have. I said, well, yeah, probably not. He goes, no, I have. My wife's right here. And she'll tell you.
Oh, gosh.
Like, okay, I don't want to talk to your wife. But all you need to do is get back in and retake the assessment. It's now you understand it. It's easy. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to call the CEO of the company. He wasn't going to retake it till the CEO contacted him. And then I said, here's the deal. You say that you've successfully completed every. I was getting a little mad. I will admit. I said, you say you've successfully completed every project you ever started. This company has asked you to take this assessment. If you don't get in and successfully complete it, you're breaking the cycle.
Nice punch back.
Yeah.
Well, yes, except he was not happy with that at all.
But it drove the point home.
Yeah.
Well, it's true. And this is what I tell my class. I said, pay attention to how they respond to having to redo a task. They are going to have to redo tasks. So pay attention. Then he went on to tell me how terrible the CEO was. He didn't like the way the company was run. He didn't like their sales approach. I mean, so the guy was just a jerk. Same day, I had another guy, large manufacturing company, going for, I think, probably a operations manager at one of the plants or something. And he took the assessment twice. It kept tripping up on him. He called me. He said, now the assessment is answering the questions itself. I'm not even entering the questions. It's just answering them. And I said, well, I don't know. You got to talk to your IT department on that. He had 18 viruses on his computer.
Ooh.
Ouch.
It took him three to 4 hours to get those cleaned up. Then he went back in to retake the assessment, which takes about 45 minutes. He contacted me at the end of the day, said he made it through, kind of told me the story. I didn't hear one complaint from that gentleman. I didn't hear the whole time. He was solution oriented. He was trying to solve the problem. There was no griping or complaining about having to redo it. And that is, I called the hiring manager. I said, I haven't even looked at his Winslow yet, but this guy should be hired just because of the energy and effort that he put in. He went above and beyond. And so, yeah, you see these people. And then the only other one I had was, and I've never had this happen, this lady got partway through it, and then she totally went ballistic. And, how dare this assessment ask me these questions? And she just totally blew apart.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Time bomb.
I talked to the owner. I said, well, don't hire her. This is what she's going to do. So there you go. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Hey, Liz, I got to ask you real quick, the Winslow certification. Can you just real quick tie that up? I seen that on your website. What's that all about?
Well, it's for either consultants or coaches who want to do, like myself, who want to get licensed, trained and licensed in it, to take it into organizations and work with the hiring and the coaching and all that kind of stuff. It is also for internal HR or leadership training professionals who want to use the Winslow in the organization. They want to be fairly independent in their understanding of it, so they can go through the training and be trained, and then still have me as a support system when they have questions, when they need to review assessments. But they can handle a lot of that by themselves because they will, they've gone through the training. So two sides to that as far as internal or external.
Nice. Good stuff. Hey, Johnny.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, man, on missed assessments?
I find this whole area completely fascinating, and I'm a believer in it. And again, my company subscribes to it. It is part of our process as well. and it's helped. It's helped us integrate a lot of good people that have been very successful hires. And I think what Lindsay brought up was a very important thing. It's not just about using it as part of your decision to hire, but if you don't utilize that and then catapult it into a development plan for the person, you're really selling yourself short, because it's your job as a leader to not only identify where your talent might be deficient, but then figure out ways to help get them above those hurdles and over them. And that's the other part that I love about the assessment. So that's good stuff.
So true. Lindsay, any final thoughts on your end? Where can people reach you at?
They can either email me at Lindsay, LINDSAY, at windridgeconsulting.com, or they can call me at 206-533-9700. Or, I don't know. You can find me on social media. If you Google my name, Lindsay Kalitsis, you will find me. Yeah.
Well, hey, Lindsay, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm just going to sum it up like this. I'm a believer. Was in the beginning, but now I am. For the last 15 years, it works. So if you're a company out there, and you want right employees, get the assessment and reach out to Lindsay. She's one of the best. That's all I have to say. Hey, everybody have a great week, right, John? Let's all everybody have a great positive week.
Absolutely. Spread the positivity.
Enjoy the rest of the summer. If you're in the north, enjoy it. We only have 3 more weeks. People in the south, you got it all year round. All right, everybody. Hey, have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.